Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another predictions video. And in today's video, I'm going to be predicting the Beterbiev versus Bivol rematch. And so, if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into this. So, of course, this is branded as the card of the century. And when you look through the whole card, I'm going to go through the whole card in this video. So apologies if it's quite a long video, but like I say, this is just such a huge event and arguably could be the biggest event in boxing history. That's kind of what it is being branded as, and when you look at the kind of the amount of world title fights and interim world title fights on this card, you got to think this could be the card with the most amount of world title fights if you include the interim world title fights ever on one card. And that's mental, to be completely honest. To me, that is crazy. And obviously Riyadh season has come in and done some amazing things. There's been some huge moments, some huge events, and they've really been showcasing boxing in the best of ways. But this is another type of level, a level in which we didn't even know was possible. We didn't even know some of the cards were possible that have already happened, but they've been able to happen. They are still leveling up. They are still progressing with each event, and I'm sure they are still wanting to bring even bigger events, Riyadh season and His Excellency, even after this one. But for the moment, it's just phenomenal to see, to be completely honest. And arguably, none of these fighters are really giving that much kind of needle in their back and forths or anything like that. And I suppose perhaps the one you could look at maybe being the most tense would be that of Parker versus Dubois, but they're not really two guys that are going to be mouthing off or anything like that. So in that way, perhaps some of the fights aren't going to get built up in that fashion through the fiery build-ups or anything like that. I feel like they're all kind of very civil with each other to an extent, and some of them aren't the best of trash talkers either. So yeah, it's quite a like I say, civil, kind of relaxed environment, seemingly for like the press conferences and things like that. But still, just the sheer weight of the event and the fighters on this card, it's great to see because it also showcases that fighters are willing to not be the main event and still be fine with it. I mean, in the past we used to have such a big thing with boxers, one of them being A side, one of them being B side, then making sure they get the main headline slot. And now that seemingly perhaps isn't as important anymore. Obviously, that the money's going to come into factor with that and everything like that. That's the reason why it's not going to be as important. But it's just interesting to see how it's playing out like that because obviously the likes of Daniel Dubois, Joseph Parker, Shakur Stevenson, just some huge names fighting on this undercard who have never not main evented are, well, in the world title kind of levels of their careers, are just happy to sit on an undercard, to be completely honest. And it's just incredible, like I say, to see. And it showcases, like I mentioned, the sheer money that probably is being put into these fighters and given to these fighters. But it's just, like I mentioned, amazing to see. And we're going to go through this whole card, well, all the big type of fights on this card. And so we're going to start off with Buatsi versus Smith for, of course, the WBO interim world light heavyweight title. It's a good, well, very good fight to start off tonight. Of course, all of these fights are incredible fights to go through the card in, but this is an intriguing matchup. It's not one that's gotten too much hype behind it. I feel like it kind of has been brushed aside to an extent on this stacked card, but it's a very intriguing one. I don't feel like the winner of this really can go and really push for a world title fight, to be completely honest. I mean, it's kind of already been said that the winner of this, unless it's a really close fight again, they're probably either going to go in a trilogy or they're going to go fight David Benavidez. So there's not really too much of a reason as for one of them to go and fight. that of Beterbiev or Bivol. I mean, of course, Beterbiev fought Smith not too long ago and beat him up, to be completely honest, but it just kind of means that this fight being for an interim world title doesn't, I suppose, mean too much. But Buatsi, of course, is coming off a win, which was a very good win for himself against Willie Hutchinson, where there was a bit of an interesting kind of build-up and a bit of needle between the two of them in the build-up, but Buatsi was made to look quite silly on the mic to an extent, and Hutchinson was coming out with these one-liners to an extent and trying to be the entertainer in the build-up, and he was perhaps coming in to go and beat Buatsi and expected to beat Buatsi to an extent, because I think Buatsi was getting overlooked for this fight of how good he actually is, because he's had fights versus Dan Aziz, Powell Stepien, Craig Richards. There's been some good fights there, but there wasn't anything too crazy to see. And he didn't beat Craig Richards in the same way that Willie Hutchinson beat him, and he looked quite poor versus Powell Stepien. And the Dan Aziz fight was a good fight, but nothing too crazy. But that last performance, again, perhaps it wasn't showing anything too crazy, but when he showed that he put it on, he really looked good, and it was quite maybe a close-ish fight to an extent, but because I think he let Hutchinson get into the fight at times, and I think he really didn't go out of first gear, to be completely honest, much of the time. I mean, there was times where he was kind of lazily going around and getting caught with shots that he really didn't need to be. When he, like I say, upped the tempo, he looked excellent, but there was quite a bit of the time in which, like I mentioned, he was kind of just plodding about, trying to go for the body, not really doing too much otherwise, and it wasn't always amazing. And like I say, getting caught with shots and having the momentum flipped on him, and even getting hurt at times. But he's representing boxer on this card. He shouldn't be letting them things happen. This should be, the biggest moment in his career. This should be him really going out and wanting to put on a statement victory, because against Callum Smith, of course, somebody who's achieved so much in his career, this, like I say, really should be the moment. And again, like I mentioned, he is representing boxer, and boxer don't have too many huge names at the moment. I mean, Ben Whittaker has to come and win versus Liam Cameron. Chris Eubank pretty much has to beat Conor Benn. Adam Azim is not quite there at the world level as of yet. So Buatsi is really leading that line for the boxing movement. And so I feel like if he is to lose this fight, he could very quickly kind of fall back down the line of fighters in the light heavyweight division. And so it's definitely a very good fight. Callum Smith, of course, he's coming off a victory himself, but it was against a very minimal opponent on the undercard of what I believe was Sonny Edwards versus Galal Yafai, if I can remember correctly. And it was a good performance. I mean, there was a time in which perhaps I was personally thinking maybe he wouldn't be able to get him out of there and he wouldn't be able to do it, but he did in the end, and did it quite nicely with some good body work at times, and showcased he still has that level of ability that is still high level, and he's not completely out of it. And the loss versus Beterbiev didn't completely walk him away, but that loss versus Beterbiev was bad, and he was arguably destroyed versus Beterbiev to an extent. I mean, his whole body was battered up, his arm was absolutely destroyed, and that really does take a lot out of you. And Buatsi, of course, hasn't had to go through that same kind of level of punishment. Not many fighters have, to be completely honest, because like I mentioned, he got really beaten up versus Beterbiev, and so it's going to be an interesting feat to see if he can deal with getting back into it again. And if he can beat somebody like a Buatsi, it would be a really big turnaround statement in his career. I think that Buatsi is going to win via unanimous decision. I think he's going to be able to be that more live opponent. I would just like to say that I just hope that he isn't switching off as much as what he did in that fight versus Willie Hutchinson. I want to see him continuously going in this fast gear, turning the fight up. He can have times where maybe he slows the tempo down, but he still needs to be punishing with his work, and he can't be lazy with his work. And I think if he does that, he could morally beat up Smith, who, like I mentioned, did get beaten up versus Beterbiev, and I think mentally maybe isn't in the same position that he once was in. And so I do believe, like I say, Buatsi via unanimous decision. I don't think he's going to be able to drop Smith. I don't think he's going to be able to really badly hurt him at any point. I don't think his power is good enough to be able to really damage Smith too much, but I think he can really punish him with the combinations that he throws and the bodywork that he operates with, and he's not going to let Smith, just continuously be on the front foot. Well, I'd like to hope not, and I think, like I say, Smith will struggle to be able to deal with the high pace that hopefully Buatsi will set, and like I say, I think Buatsi will win via unanimous decision. Moving on now to Zhang versus Kabayel, of course, for yet again another interim world title, that one being the WBC interim world heavyweight title. And this is again another great matchup. I mean, Zhang coming off that performance last time versus Deontay Wilder, where he really kind of retired, well, arguably should have retired Deontay Wilder. It seems like Wilder's coming back and fighting Harper for a reason why nobody really knows, but it seems like he wants to do that, and so, I suppose each to their own to an extent. It's a fight in which Wilder doesn't really need at all in his career, and he definitely should retire, but Zhang looked impressive in that performance versus Wilder. He looked very powerful, looked very strong, and he looked like that against Joseph Parker at the same time as well. I mean, obviously, he lost that fight in a close fight versus Joseph Parker, but he was throwing shots and dropping Parker with shots that looked really weak, and it looked like he didn't throw them with any kind of conviction at all, and they were doing enough to really damage, hurt, and drop Parker. Obviously, Parker showed a lot of heart, a lot of will, and was able to really push through well, but Zhang still looked very good in that performance, and so, Zhang is definitely one of the most dangerous fighters in the first few rounds, and there's no kind of disputing that, to be completely honest. I mean, there is nobody who can hurt that much, damage that much to an opponent in the first kind of few rounds as what you probably would say Zhang does. Obviously, he does slow down. His output can really kind of deteriorate into the later rounds, and he can just be a big target walking towards you. Obviously, he's a heavy guy. He came in, I don't know the exact figures. I think he came in like 280 pounds versus Deontay Wilder, where Deontay Wilder was like 218 pounds or something like that. But it does highlight how heavy Zhilei Zhang is, and he's a fan favourite of mine. I mean, I really enjoy watching him fight. I mean, I've watched his fights for quite a while now. I mean, he's definitely had some big surprising moments. When he was just on matchroom shows and kind of picking up wins as this Chinese heavyweight who was almost in his 40s and was able to pick up these big wins and, slowly build himself up. When he got that first big opportunity, I was so excited to see what he had to offer, and he's looked good ever since, and I'm very glad to see he's been rewarded with, close fights and big wins for more big matchups. And obviously him versus Spicoli would have been a great matchup. Hopefully we will still see that at some point. Of course, he has to beat Kabayel, in which is going to be a very tough test. Tough test. I mean, Kabayel is somebody who himself has managed to gather up some momentum, and he's kind of come out of nowhere. I mean, his name was floated around with some big fights in the heavyweight division at one point, but His Excellency came along, gave him the opportunity versus Makhmudov. He really shocked Makhmudov and did something in which everybody wasn't really expecting him to do versus Makhmudov, where he was really punishing and hurt him really well and made Makhmudov look like a poor heavyweight. It really showcased the weaknesses in his ability, and that's what Kabayel has to offer. He then went and beat Frank Sanchez convincingly again, showcased some beautiful body working close, and made it really difficult for him. Obviously, he's then kind of had a slight bit of time out. I don't know necessarily if that was his own doing or not, if he wanted to do that or not, but he has had a little bit of time out, and so I feel like his name kind of has been maybe forgotten about a little bit of how good he actually can be in the heavyweight division, and his momentum perhaps has slowed a little bit because, like I say, he was really riding high, but now it's seemingly, like I say, maybe slowed a little bit. He's really representing and leading German boxing, and to be honest, when you look at German boxing fighters, there really isn't too many of them having too much success, and so like I mentioned, he's really leading that, and he's got that whole nation on his back and supporting him, and he's doing so far great things, and perhaps he is, in my opinion, the more versatile fighter out of the two. I'm going to say that Kabayel will win via TKO in round 11. Like I mentioned, I feel like he is definitely the more varied attacker out of the two. Obviously, he's going to have to deal with Zhang in the early rounds. Kabayel offers something a little bit different to that of the heavyweights because he's not going to be just slugging it out the entire time, but he isn't, the most technical. He's still going to stand in front of you. He's still going to be a big target there to be hit. He is going to get caught with shots probably early. It's going to be interesting to see how he is able to survive them, but of course he has, similarly to an extent as to that of Joseph Parker, he's had to deal with big power punches, and he's been able to do so. And so if he can do that, like I mentioned, versus Zhang in the early rounds, then I think you can really expose Zhang and showcase that his body work is superior. I think he could land some of his nice uppercuts. I think, like I mentioned, he is the more varied attacker out of the two, but he is just going to have to get through the early rounds. And then, like I mentioned, when Zhang really slows down, I think he could put on an onslaught of shots and really punish Zhang and get him out of there. Maybe not by dropping him, it would be a huge feat if he's able to drop him, but by just completely wearing him down and destroying him in that way. But personally, as a fan favourite of mine, I would love to see Zhilei Zhang go on to win this fight. I'm just going off what I actually believe is going to happen skill-wise, and I do think that Kabayel is the better one in that aspect. But of course, you're always going to have to be aware of Zhilei Zhang in the first few rounds. Moving on now to Stevenson versus Schofield for a non-interim world title in the WBC World Lightweight title, which is of course Shakur Stevenson's belt. Obviously this fight is a fight in which maybe not the fight in which would have happened if Riyadh season wasn't around, to be completely honest. I mean, when you look at the past two fights, maybe Buatsi Smith probably wouldn't have happened, but I feel like Kabayel and Zhang could have happened without Riyadh season being involved. But this fight definitely probably wouldn't have thought would have happened because Schofield, he's, I believe, 18-0. He is coming off a bit of a rocky fight in his last fight versus Giron, and before that he was meant to fight Sylvester Silve, and so that was on paper a very good fight. Of course, then Silve went and lost badly via knockout versus Lucas Bardi, and so that fight never ended up happening. But that was the kind of level in which Golden Boy was ready to put him in at. Does that mean that he perhaps isn't ready for this fight versus Shakur Stevenson? No. His last time performance, like I say, was rocky, but rocky mainly at the end of the fight. In the kind of early part of the fight, he was dominating and he was looking very good, and he was showing something in which I haven't really seen from Floyd Schofield so far. That being the sharpness from him, that being the fact that he wants to try and box and is willing to fight on the outside and was picking his shots nicely, really utilising his speed well and showcasing he can counter well, he can use his reactions well and can still look good in that way. And it was something refreshing to see from that of Floyd Schofield. Obviously, Schofield at times he went and resorted to the kind of aggressive nature in which he has. He's not a crazily strong power puncher, but he does have a lot of aggression, and most of the time his fights are going to be entertaining as a result of that. And it seems like he is growing and developing as a fighter, but I still believe that it's going to take time for him to develop. I think this is a very big step up versus Shakur Stevenson, and maybe perhaps this is a good time to take Shakur because Shakur is obviously receiving a lot of hate at the moment. And when you kind of look around and see all the hate in which he's receiving because of his style, perhaps you feel bad for Shakur to an extent. I mean, I personally do. I still think he's a very technically gifted fighter who can showcase his defensive skills really well and look really good when he's is firing and when he is throwing and when he is letting go of his hands. Obviously, his style isn't the most entertaining, and in his last few fights, it hasn't really showcased anything offensive wise that is going to, wow fans or anything like that. And of course, he also doesn't really have kind of too much power at the same time. But he's being not ducked, but he's definitely not being favoured by champions. They're not really welcoming him to fight, and perhaps you kind of have to argue that there's a reason for that. And that's because his style is difficult to handle, it's difficult to deal with. Even now that he has a world title, guys still don't really seem to still want to fight him. Or fight him at all, and that there's a reason to fight him now. And obviously, in the middle kind of parts of last year, he retired to maybe kind of stir things up and try get more attention and try create a fight against somebody. But again, that's just not really happened. The fight versus Gervonta Davis is of course the fight in which every fan wants to see. He's now with Matchroom, which is perhaps going to limit things with him actually going and fighting against Gervonta Davis. But of course, His Excellency is involved now, so maybe if anybody can make that fight happen, it would be him. But it's just going to be interesting to see, of course, where his head's at. Obviously, coming into the Harutinian fight, he was kind of expecting to maybe try and put on that bit more of a contest and try and make it that bit more entertaining. He definitely did throw that bit more than what he did versus the Los Santos fight, where he really didn't do too much and didn't really throw too much and really was just very defensive the entire fight. But it still wasn't anything too crazy offensive wise, which was going to, again, not stop the hate. And so it's going to be intriguing to see, with an upcoming guy like Schofield, if Stevenson is going to see this as an opportunity on a huge stage to try and get a big performance, try and get a big win. It would have been, again, interesting to see if he was wanting to do that versus Joe Cordina. Obviously, he was meant to fight Joe Cordina in what I believe would have been on the undercard of Beterbiev versus Bivol in the first fight, but that of course fell through, and to be fair, that's kind of cut Joe Cordina's chances of fighting for a world title, I believe, for the moment. But now he's got, like I say, another hungry, up-and-coming fighter who did showcase some defensive vulnerabilities himself in that last performance versus Giron. Obviously, he got dropped. It wasn't really a bad kind of being dropped. He didn't get hurt too badly, but he did, like I mentioned, into the later rounds show some defensive vulnerabilities. Shakur might see this as an opportunity to be able to really turn the tempo up, showcase his skills, and maybe be able to dominate. Do I think he has the power to really stop too many guys? No, but he can outsmart them, and if he can outsmart them, then maybe he'll be able to stop them. I'm not too sure, but I think that Stevenson will win via unanimous decision. Like I say, I still don't believe he's going to be able to stop Schofield. I think Schofield's going to come, possibly try and outbox him, then resort to being aggressive in the later rounds, but I feel like it might be a bit too late, and I think Stevenson might have had his confidence grown from, Schofield trying to outbox him. Schofield doesn't have a bad defense. In the early rounds, he showcased that versus Giron, showcased his speed, showcased his countering ability as well, but I still believe that Stevenson is the much more better defensive fighter, and if Stevenson wants to have a chess match with him in the early to mid rounds, then I'm sure he would favour that Stevenson. And then if he, if Schofield wants to go and be more offensive in the later rounds, then I still think that Schofield can outsmart him and win in that way. Because, like I say, when Schofield does go aggressive and does get frustrated, he does showcase defensive vulnerabilities. It's just going to be have to be a very switched on performance yet again for Stevenson to be able to get this win, but I do believe that he will be able to, and like I say, via unanimous decision again, and then just a fight in which everybody's wanting. It's him versus Gervonta Davis. Will we see that? Probably not, to be completely honest. I mean, we don't really... It does seem like Davis versus Lamont Roach is going to happen, but, that's going to happen and then probably won't fight for a while, so probably not. But, of course, we also have William Zepeda versus Tevin Farmer, the rematch. I still really want to see Zepeda come and try and fight Stevenson, because I feel like Zepeda, no matter what, will probably try and put on a high tempo and really be aggressive the entire fight. And I just don't necessarily know if he's had to deal with that level of Mexican type of aggression as of yet, Stevenson. And so I definitely think it could be still a tough test. Obviously, Zepeda, had it tough last time versus Tevin Farmer, but I don't think he was exposed by any means. And so I still think that is a great fight to happen. It will be definitely the biggest one for both of their careers. And so hopefully that fight will happen next, of course, if Stevenson is able to get through Schofield. And at that point, they are huge names to be involved with Riyadh season. Yet again, two more, huge names, Stevenson and Zepeda, being involved possibly with Riyadh season. Then going on now to Ortiz Jr. versus Madrimov for the WBC interim world super welterweight title. Yet again, going back to the interim titles being on the line, but still a great fight this one, and quite a unexpected matchup in my opinion. I mean, Ortiz Jr. really has the big following and the big support and the big backing by Golden Boy. He's definitely Golden Boy's kind of biggest asset at this point, to be completely honest. I mean, Ryan Garcia may be above him, but obviously we don't really always know what's going on with Ryan Garcia. And now that William Zepeda has, had a tough fight versus Tevin Farmer, at the moment Ortiz Jr. is definitely that shining light, even though he had a very, very tough fight versus Bohachuk last time out when he fought, and that was an amazing fight, to be completely honest. But it did showcase some weaknesses in which we haven't seen so far in Ortiz Jr.'s game. Ortiz definitely was very frustrated in that fight and was trying to let out that anger, and it just, like I say, went again to showcase defensive vulnerabilities. He really dropped his guard, he was getting caught with shots quite often, he was able to hurt Bohachuk a lot, but he did slow down a bit at times, and it wasn't as easy as what I'm sure he was expecting, to be completely honest. And so this fight is another very tricky fight for him to take, and I give him a lot of respect for taking this fight. It's, like I say, against a Madrimov who is coming off a fight versus Terence Crawford, where it's probably made Terence Crawford never want to take another voluntary defence again, to be completely honest, because it was a very tough night's work for Crawford. Certain people had him winning, or certain people had it a draw. So, like I mentioned, was a very tough night for Crawford, and Madrimov put in that work and he made it difficult for him. And, showcased a style in which was very tough, and showcased that his amateur experience was enough to really mix it with the best of the best in boxing. And he showcased that there is a difference kind of between world level fighters and fringe world level fighters, same as what Bohachuk done in his last fight versus Ismail Davis. Of course, Bohachuk was meant to fight Madrimov. I still personally hope that that fight does happen, even if Madrimov does lose versus Ortiz Jr., because I do think that definitely has the makings to be a great fight. But yeah, Bohachuk was able to really dismantle and destroy Ismail Davis in that fight, and so he again showcased as well that there is a difference between world level and fringe world level type of fighters. And so, like I mentioned, it's a very interesting task to see if Ortiz Jr. is going to be able to deal with the tricky Madrimov, who works angles in which you don't really see and finds gaps in which you don't really realise are there, and was having a lot of success just picking out them shots really crisply versus Crawford, and just being unorthodox and hard to deal with and awkward. And Ortiz Jr., like I say, got frustrated versus Bohachuk, and he does have a different style, Madrimov, but he might be able to frustrate Ortiz Jr., who seemingly does get frustrated quite easily and then will fight quite emotionally and quite recklessly to an extent. But to be completely honest, I mean, the most important thing it's just nice to see that Ortiz is healthy and he's fit and he's able to fight. I mean, I feel like people are forgetting this guy had a lot of time out because he was constantly getting ill. And perhaps, it was kind of maybe linked to him training a bit too hard and things like that. But I'm just very glad, like I mentioned, to see that he's actually back fighting again and he can actually operate at a world level and he can make it to fights without getting ill or really badly sick or just having problems. It's just very nice to see him being able to fight, because when he is at his best, he is a world class fighter and he is a very amazing fighter to watch. I mean, obviously his record speaks for himself. The amount of knockouts in which he's had, Bahachuk being the only guy he couldn't knock out, and he hurt Bahachuk on multiple occasions. Not many guys can deal with getting hurt as much as what Bahachuk did and still keep coming forwards, to be completely honest. But Madrimov might be able to do that. I think it's excellent to see that as well that he's been given this opportunity. I think it really showcases where His Excellency stands with, if you give a good fight, you make a good account of yourself, then you're going to get brought back no matter what. And I really respect that, to be completely honest. I mean, Madrimov obviously lost versus Crawford, but he put on an excellent performance and was warranted a huge fight afterwards. Ishmael Davis, again, going back to that, he put on a great fight versus Josh Kelly and he came in on short notice. And so when the fight kind of came where Madrimov pulled out versus Bahachuk, Ishmael Davis was given the opportunity again, was allowed to come in, and His Excellency just really enjoys fighters that are really true to what they say and to kind of, like I say, live up to what they're saying and everything like that. And saying if you're going to say that you're willing to fight anybody, then you have to prove it. And His Excellency seems to enjoy that, and Madrimov is reaping them rewards at the moment. And obviously, like I mentioned, interim world title on the line. I think that Ortiz Jr. is going to win via TKO in round 6. I think a lot of people are expecting Ortiz Jr. to struggle with Madrimov and perhaps this be a bit of a banana skin fight for him, but in my opinion, I believe that Ortiz Jr. is going to be able to wear Madrimov down. He's not going to be in a chess match versus Crawford. To be honest, I would like to see him just showcase his aggressive style yet again and not try and just pick out shots and not change anything. He may change his style to an extent because of that last fight versus Bahachuk and how that went out, but I still believe Ortiz Jr. will possibly be able to land and hurt Madrimov. I think Crawford wasn't landing as strong versus Madrimov as what I feel like Ortiz Jr. can do, and if he can land shots, he still of course has that immense level of power. And then, like I mentioned, I don't feel like many people can take the amount of punishment and being hurt the amount of times as what Bahachuk was able to do, and I don't believe Madrimov will be able to do that, even though he may be able to point score and even win a couple rounds with his awkward style. So then who Ortiz Jr. could go on to fight? I mean, obviously this super welterweight division is becoming a bit of an interesting kind of scene at the moment. I mean, we've had Zhu, of course, recently get knocked out badly and then drop out as a result of that, and not drop out, but I mean kind of drop down the rankings. And so there's Murtazaliev. That's a good fight. That's a good way to get Ortiz Jr. into a world title kind of position, world title champion position, instead of just an interim belt. But then, of course, there's a Crawford as well. And like I mentioned, I feel like Crawford isn't going to take any fight except from the top fights, to be completely honest. Maybe he may be a bit unwilling to take this fight versus Ortiz Jr., but he is a big name, Ortiz Jr., and Crawford is kind of wanting to fight Canelo, but Canelo is going to seemingly have a fight in May before fighting Crawford in September. But Crawford is also booked at weight to fight Canelo, so maybe that fight doesn't happen. Fundora versus Booker, the winner of that could be a great option to fight Ortiz Jr. That could be a huge fight. Fundora has seemingly really flipped his career around, and if he can get a big win versus Booker, then he could get back on a Riyadh season show, and that could happen. And then, other names. I mean, Ennis, of course, being in the welterweight division, him fighting Stanionis. Of course, Stanionis was meant to fight Ortiz Jr. multiple times, but of course, like I mentioned, Ortiz Jr. was in a phase where he was pulling out of fights quite continuously. So that fight could definitely happen. The winner of Ennis versus Stanionis to fight Ortiz Jr. It seems like Ennis is wanting to move up in weight anyway, so that fight for sure could happen, and there isn't really too many huge fights left in the welterweight division for Ennis if he beats Stanionis, to be completely honest. So that could happen. Of course, Teofimo Lopez is being talked about as an option. Possibly that could happen as well. So I think there is definitely some huge matchups there available for Ortiz Jr. if he is able to get through Madrimov. And I think if he's able to do it destructively as well, then that really gets the hype back behind him again. Moving on now to Adames versus Sheeraz for the WBC World Middleweight title. It's interesting to see how this is for, of course, this world title. I mean, there has been better fights on this card in which haven't been for world titles, in my opinion, but Adames has managed to slide himself into a world title position. It's quite, not shameful, but maybe sad to an extent to see that the middleweight division really isn't in the best of states at the moment. There really isn't, bar Janabek, not really a huge kind of name there. I mean, Janabek isn't going for unification fights. Erislandi Lara is looking good, but he's definitely, of course, aging with each fight, and he yet again is picking opponents as well. And Adames is kind of floating around as well. Of course, Chris Eubank Jr. is another guy floating around, but he's not really earned a world title fight as of yet. But it does mean that Sheeraz has the possibilities, if he is to beat Adames, to really come and slide in and become a huge star in the middleweight division, because they are crying out for a huge star. I'm very happy to see that this fight has been made, and I give Adames credit for taking this fight. Of course, again, I'm sure the money was very good for this fight and everything like that, because this is definitely Adames' toughest test to date. Arguably, you would probably say this is Sheeraz's as well, but like I mentioned, Adames isn't really been tested that much. Obviously, he's had one title defense, and that was against Gorsha last time out, and it was a close fight, but neither of them really did too much. Adames is at his best when he's going to the body, throwing really good, sharp combinations, powerful combinations as well. But he just wasn't really doing it too much versus Gorsha, and when Gorsha did throw, he was having a lot of success himself, and they were just trading a little bit at times, and it wasn't really an excellent performance. And Gorsha is a good fighter, but he's lost at the highest level most of the time, and he's not really a huge name, to be completely honest. It was just a bit of a, why is he fighting him for a first defense? Maybe it was just to get that first defense under his belt, but Sheeraz is definitely going to be a much different test. I mean, Sheeraz hasn't faced anybody, in my opinion, as hard a hitting as that of Adames will be. So Adames is definitely going to have that on his side, and he can't be underestimated as a fighter, Adames, at all. Obviously, like I say, he's had it easy to an extent in his career, the fights in which he's been able to get to be able to become a world champion, but he is still a very good fighter, and he is still a world level type fighter. So Sheeraz, of course, has to be really switched on and has to be yet again trying to put out another very good performance. I mean, last time out versus Tyler Denny, he put on an amazing performance and didn't let Tyler Denny get in close at all. And that's what Adames is going to want to do. Obviously, Adames is probably going to be that more varied in his ways that he's going to try and get in close, but still, Sheeraz is the taller guy by not as crazy amounts as what it was versus Tyler Denny, but still quite a big margin. He'll have the reach as well. He is always seemingly able to find the space, and like I say, is going to hurt you from the get-go from the distance in which he's able to find. And he hurt Tyler Denny from the very, very start and showcased that Denny was just not at his level at all. And so it's great to see yet again that he's fighting for a world title, because he could have been maybe tiptoed around a little bit longer, but he is one of the best talents in which Queensberry have, and so he had to be given an opportunity to fight for a world title at some point soon. and now of course we are seeing it. And so it's definitely the, in my opinion, right time and perhaps the right fight for him to have. I was expecting him to fight Erislandy Lara, again another fight in which I probably would have favoured him in, but I feel like this fight maybe on paper that bit maybe more of an easier fight for him, just stylistic wise. And he obviously, I feel like, is the favourite, even though he's not the champion. I think that Sheeraz is going to win via KO in round 9. I feel like Adamus is going to be able to put up that bit more of a tougher test for that of Sheeraz than, of course, that of Tyler Denny or, any fights that he's had before him. But or like Ammo Austin Williams as well as another name, but Sheeraz is probably gonna have to take a couple big power punches. Adamus might be able to get inside a little bit at times, but when Sheeraz is able to get comfortable, I think he can pick his shots. He's always very comfortable to mid range behind his jab, and then he can have his success, pick his shots, hurt Adamus, and then be able to stop him and put out a statement victory by stopping, of course, a world champion. And then he yet again can then go on and try become a star in the middleweight division. He has the backing of His Excellency. His Excellency seems to love watching him fight, and why not? Because he looks so good, and he definitely has the makings to be a star, and he definitely has the following, especially out in Saudi Arabia as well, to yet again, like I say, be a star. And so perhaps, like I mentioned, the names aren't always massive that are there available to him, but if he is able to one day get a fight with Janabek, that would be an amazing fight because they are that kind of more similarly matched up, and that would be definitely the most even fight in which I feel like Hamzah Sheeraz could have at the moment, unless he is to move up in divisions. But he looks very good at the moment, and I think he looks very sharp, and I feel like he should definitely stay in this middleweight division for as long as possible and have as much success and reign for as long as possible. Probably will go on to try and have a few voluntary mandatory defences, and then, build his resume up and become that bit more of a star. And this is definitely the perfect step for him, in my opinion, for him to be able to get this KO victory. And the final fight on the undercard, in which I wanted to talk about, like I say, just an amazing undercard, literally the best undercard we have ever seen. Dubois versus Parker. A huge fight for the IBF World Heavyweight title on an undercard. I don't feel like people are really letting that sink in. That is mental, to be completely honest. To have a world heavyweight title on an undercard is unheard of. And this is what's happening. This is what Riyadh season doing. And, obviously, Dubois is coming off the highest of highs by knocking out Anthony Joshua in the most dramatic of fashions. And Parker is coming off some very creditable victories himself. I mean, beating Deontay Wilder, where Deontay Wilder was, still in a high point in his career and was still expected to come and look as destructive. And then, Park was meant to lose versus Wilder, and then Wilder was meant to be able to go on to fight AJ. But obviously, Parker disrupted that. And then he also fought Zhilei Zhang as well, another really powerful puncher. Like I mentioned, he struggled a little bit at times, got dropped a couple of times, but showed that he has heart. Both of these fighters have shown in their last few fights that they do have heart and they are willing to dig deep. And that's been questions about them both. I mean, Parker obviously has had losses in his career. The one versus Joe Joyce, similarly to that of the one that Dubois faced versus Joe Joyce, showed that level of, are they really willing to dig deep? Do they have it in them? Of course, Dubois got beaten up by Usyk, and again, that was showcasing, does he have it in him? Can he dig deep? But unlike that of Anthony Joshua, when times have been tough and they've been questioned in fights and they've lost fights and their mental toughness has really been tested, they've been able to pull through and look phenomenal in matchups afterwards. And obviously, Dubois stepped up on the biggest stage of them all and was able to destroy Anthony Joshua and do it really convincingly. I mean, Anthony Joshua looked very, very poor that night. I can't not mention that. But Dubois was able to land his shots and timed him with an excellent shot in the end when he was hurt, and was, of course, able to get him out of there. But Dubois, his power is definitely getting more recognition now, and I feel like that's something in which is very much deserved. Parker definitely doesn't have that level of power, and he's not been going and knocking out guys as of recent, but I like that he's been given this opportunity. and I feel like it's very deserved for him to be given this opportunity. And if he is able to become world champion again, then it's huge for his career, the turnaround in his career. And I feel like there was definitely a point in which he wasn't kind of expecting to be at this point. Similarly, maybe to that of Dubois, but they've both really done very well. I think Parker's style has very much changed under Andy Lee, and it's been very excellent to see. Obviously, it's not the most technical, but again, similarly to an extent of that of Kabayel, it's just a high work rate, not slugging it out and making it difficult for you in close. And Parker doesn't really let you have too much space. He will club in with the big overhands when he comes in, and he will definitely throw a lot and be able to maintain that of a high output throughout the whole fight, in which, Dubois has shown he can do as well, like he did versus Jerome Miller. When it got into the later rounds, he was able to keep throwing at a high output. But Parker will probably be able to maybe take the shots better than what AJ was able to from Dubois. Obviously, like I said, Dubois' power is looking immense at the moment. He may be able to drop Parker a few times in the early rounds, and it's going to be a very fiery contest. I'm pretty sure of it, but it's going to be interesting. I feel like the heavyweight division is going to get a huge star after the winner of this fight. Dubois is on the brink of being a huge star, in my opinion. I feel like British heavyweight boxing, with of course Fury losing, with AJ losing badly, they need a big star, and Dubois is there. He has it in the palm of his hand. If he is able to beat Parker really well, then he sets up the rematch with Usyk, and then he is pretty much the biggest star in UK heavyweight boxing currently. And so, if Parker's able to do it as well, then he, like I say, could definitely go on to be a huge star as well, and probably will get the fight versus Usyk at the same time as well. So, both of these fighters are going to be wanted after this fight, however the result goes. I mean, Usyk has said that he's going to fight the winner of them, but then of course we also have Zhang, Kabayel, Bakoli, Ajagba, Joshua floating around, Fury possibly floating around, and just, multiple other big names as well. Dillian White getting back involved again as well. There is some great names. I'm sure I'm missing a couple off the top of my head, but both of these have to, of course, come through this fight. Dubois may be overlooking this fight to an extent, and Parker has picked up upon that. Obviously, Dubois got in the ring when Usyk won and beat Fury and kind of started trying to mouth off to him and things like that. Usyk didn't really seem to care at all, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see. And I feel like the winner of this definitely has an opportunity to make it difficult and possibly beat Usyk. I feel like Usyk's mindset after the Fury fight has changed a bit. I feel like he's becoming a bit more relaxed. I feel like he's maybe taking his foot off the gas a little bit now, which I don't blame him for at all. He's achieved so much and he's been through so many grueling camps. But he said he only has 2 more fights left. And so this is definitely maybe a good time to take Usyk, if there is ever a good time to take Usyk in a fight. For this matchup though, I think that Parker is going to win via unanimous decision. Yes, that is most definitely going to be a surprising thing to say, but I feel like Parker is going to be able to get in close to that of Dubois. I feel like Dubois can definitely hurt Parker at the start of the fight and possibly even drop him once, maybe twice. But Dubois' kind of style, where he's going to be clubbing in these big overhands, I think Parker, if he can keep his guard up high and if he can keep really close to Dubois' chest, then he can make it difficult. And if he can, spring in with attacks, spring out with attacks as well, and, keep a bit of a distance at times as well, he could lead Dubois onto shots. And I feel like Dubois might be overlooking, like I say, may get frustrated in this fight at the same time as well. And I think Parker definitely has the ability to frustrate him. And like I say, go on to win, in my opinion, via unanimous decision. I definitely could be wrong. It's a bold shout for me to say, but it's just what I'm thinking. And, don't shoot the messenger. It's a bold statement, but I think Parker definitely has it in him. And I would love to see Parker win. I mean, I think both of these guys have their own unique personalities. I mean, Dubois definitely doesn't seem like he's the most switched on when he's trying to speak. He's definitely not the most, grammatically best of speakers, but he seems to be able to entertain when he does kind of say things as well. And, Parker is kind of the opposite. He seems to be able to speak quite well. He puts out these entertaining kind of call out videos where he's just singing and things like that. And he's also done it with films as well back in lockdown, and so he's an entertaining guy. He seems like a great guy as well at the same time. I would love to see Parker win, and I think he will, and I think he can do it via, like I mentioned, unanimous decision. I don't think he's going to be able to stop Dubois, but I think it can definitely happen. Going on back now to speak about the main event, of course, the rematch versus Beterbiev versus Bivol. Obviously, the first fight lived up to an immense level of hype in which it did have behind it, and so, you know, this fight is definitely a fight in which, there's been quite a few in boxing, but it is still rare to see a fight in which is so evenly matched up. I feel like it will be every time that they fight a great fight. It just has the makings to always be that, and it's definitely lived up to the hype, and His Excellency has seen that. That's why he's been so quick to put in the rematch for it, and we're no longer waiting these long waits to see rematches for these big fights because His Excellency can see when a fighter deserves a rematch and will give it him like that. Arguably, you could say that Bivol may be the most skilled fighter in the world right now. When you look at his ability to be able to nullify opponents, obviously he did drop off a tiny bit in the last few rounds versus Beterbiev, but when he was so switched on, I feel like he definitely has a claim to be one of the most skilled boxers in the world right now. That's why pound for pound, if he is able to beat Beterbiev in this fight, even if it does go on to a trilogy, he needs to be ranked very highly pound for pound because of what he's been able to achieve, and it's great to now see that he's getting the attention that he deserves. Beterbiev has had this attention for a while because Beterbiev obviously has been knocking everybody out. But Bivol, obviously he beat Canelo and that gave him a load of attention. It's just great to see that he's getting this recognition. I suppose same for the both fighters to an extent. They both deserve it. It's interesting to see how they're trying to sell this fight because neither of them are the biggest of talkers. I mean, Bivol took the loss versus Beterbiev the first time very, very well. I feel like fans definitely turned against Beterbiev to an extent and kind of are now perhaps overlooking Beterbiev for this fight and really rooting and going for Bivol to win this one. And that's just because Bivol made Beterbiev look human. He made him look vulnerable at times. He showcased that Beterbiev isn't able to knock out everybody. It's definitely going to be a mental thing that Beterbiev's going to have to deal with. And it seems like he's made him that little bit more, maybe not frustrated, but that little more annoyed because he won. And, you can't change the judges' scorecards. He won. And he's getting this ruled off by the fans, and it's getting a rematch called instantly. So even His Excellency doesn't believe that he won. And so he must be questioning himself and questioning his win. And he did so well. He looked so good in that fight still. And the fact that he's getting this win kind of just overlooked and taken away from him, it's just, interesting to see that he is now seemingly talking that bit more. He's not really the biggest talker. Neither of these guys are, to be completely honest, and it's difficult to sell a fight with two fighters that aren't really that talkative, to be completely honest. And so, if these guys were going back and forth and making a crazy build up, then perhaps it would have been that easier to sell. Not saying Beterbiev is going to be ever going out there and swearing and, really trying to shove Bivol off the stage or anything like that, but he seems to be trying to talk a bit more, trying to vocalize himself a bit more, trying to showcase that his performance was worthy of a win, and maybe firing himself up even more for this fight, which is definitely going to be a scary thing to see. Beterbiev has that fear factor about him, no matter who he's against. I'm sure even Bivol was that little bit, maybe not afraid, but wary of Beterbiev, and maybe going into the fight was, getting a few butterflies because that's what Beterbiev does. And now, of course, like I mentioned, he's been shown that he can be made more human. He shows that he can also go through the rounds really well. I mean, he came on very strongly in the later rounds, in which nobody really kind of thought, to be completely honest. I feel like most people thought that Beterbiev would come on better into the later rounds because of the Bivol would come on better into later rounds because Beterbiev hasn't been that distance. He's been stopping everybody. But Bivol did, like I say, kind of slow off a little bit. He showed that he could withstand the power of that of Beterbiev, and And that was another huge question, of course, coming into the first fight because, of course, Beterbiev has been knocking everybody out. Bivol showed that. Beterbiev showed his thing with being able to go all the rounds. So they both showed a lot in that fight. And that's why, again, it's another reason why it's deserving to be a rematch. And it was just such an excellent fight. There was no kind of real clinching or anything like that. The styles just gelled perfectly. And like I say, I feel like whenever these two fight, it's always going to be an excellent fight. And to speak about them both kind of individually as fighters, I'm not going to go into too much depth about it. It's just, the base kind of things. Of course, they are both world class fighters, and so there is a lot of things I'm going to miss off. But Bivol plants his feet very well. His timing in planting his feet is definitely improved, and he was trying to push Beterbiev back a bit. Perhaps I would have liked to see that a little bit more, but he was planting his feet well whenever he did do it. His range management is excellent, similarly to that of Beterbiev, just two guys with excellent range management. He's able to change his game plan very well and did come into this fight in the first fight with an excellent game plan as well. He's very fluid, he's very strong-willed, his jab is able to gain him positions very well, and that was the main thing that was ever kind of pushing back Beterbiev more than anything, was the jab of that of Bivol, which was a surprising thing to see. He can punch through the guard very well and is willing to do that with the straight shots. Of course, he has great cardio. Like I mentioned, I feel like he did slow down, but he was moving a lot more than that of Beterbiev. Beterbiev was just walking down Bivol. Bivol accepted the back foot, and he can fight on the front and the back foot, but he accepted the back foot versus Beterbiev. Perhaps that was a risky thing to do, and that's maybe why he lost the fight, because on paper he wasn't looking like the more aggressor, but he does show great cardio to be able to move around that well for the entire fight to an extent. He has a very high guard, both of them do. They do catch shots well. Bivol doesn't load up as much as that's what Beterbiev does. He's very accurate, definitely the more accurate out of the two, just very sharp in that aspect. He brings his shots back very well, and his timing is excellent. He was having a lot of success with the timing, trying to counter Beterbiev at times. Negatives about him, I think he does accept the back foot, and like I say, was kind of willingly walking around or moving around the entire fight, and his physicality, like I say, was there. He was trying to shove back Beterbiev at times, but it wasn't more as consistent as what I would like to have seen. He can fight in close, but it didn't look as good as what when Beterbiev was able to get in close with Bivol. He has his gap kind of there open to the body. He definitely has his shoulders quite wide, which is just his style, but it definitely leaves a gap to the inside, kind of shots to the body, in which Beterbiev was going towards a little bit. His shot variation is definitely much more limited than that of Beterbiev, in my opinion. He can slow down, but can't really afford to slow down in this fight, I don't believe. I think if he didn't slow down, he probably would have won the fight in the first fight, but we're going to have to wait and see if he's going to slow down these last rounds in this fight. Maybe he's not going to do that. Maybe he's going to change his game plan a little bit so he doesn't do that. He, of course, has to be 100%. Maybe he lost his focus a little bit versus Beterbiev in that first fight. It's something that'll be quite surprising, but you have to be so 100% focused versus Beterbiev because of the threat he always has. He does, like I mentioned, slow down, and I think he does welcome fighters on a little bit, and like I say, inviting that pressure, and he was definitely getting caught with shots as a result of that at times versus Beterbiev. Beterbiev as a fighter, of course he's a front foot fighter, of course he's going to break you down, he destroys you, he breaks you down and destroys you. You saw that versus Callum Smith, like I say. If he knows that he's better than you and he can find the weakness, he's going to go to them weaknesses and he's going to capitalise over and over again. I think he's varying up his power better than what he has done in the past. He's not just being quite as messy and throwing his shots as powerfully. And that was very good to see versus Bivol, because Bivol was setting traps, but Beterbiev wasn't always falling for them traps, which was nice to see and was refreshing to see. He is very good at getting his lead foot inside. Again, that was another reason why he was able to have a lot of success versus Bivol. Maybe he hasn't got as good a balance as that of Bivol, but he was still able to get his foot on the inside. He will punch all over. He's always a threat, like I said. He's got that aggressive / fear factor about him. He closes the gap quickly, was able to do that well in the first fight. He improves throughout the fight. When he goes to the body, he looks excellent as well. Perhaps I would have liked to see him maybe go to the body a little bit more, but yeah, just a world class, of course, operator. Negatives about him, I think his head's on the line, definitely that much more of that of Bivol, so he was able to get caught when Bivol was able to really get his timing on point a few times, he definitely has the more untidier footwork. Like I say, he's the much lesser balanced fighter out of the two. Bivol's balance is just amazing, but he definitely has the untidier footwork. He does square up. I think he is the slower out of the two, but did come into the final rounds, like I say, being the quicker out of the two. He doesn't always remember his jab, but it is a very good jab when he does get behind it, and he definitely has to utilize it versus Bivol because of how good Bivol's jab is. He doesn't kind of shut the ring off as well as what he can do. I don't think he did that as well in the last fight. I feel like Bivol, maybe it's just all credit to his movement, but Beterbiev was seemingly just struggling to deal with pinning down Bivol throughout that fight. He does walk onto shots. I think he perhaps can get frustrated, and he might get frustrated in this contest. He does, you know, have the less accuracy out of the two. He doesn't always go for counters, and I don't think his reactions are as sharp. He does stay in range quite a lot, and I don't feel like he handles a high output that well. I feel like Bivol handles the high output better, and Bivol, when he was turning up the tempo, was turning up the pace, he was having success with the combinations in which he was throwing. Beterbiev is the favourite for this fight, and I think that Bivol is going to win via unanimous decision. I'm going to go with what I'm expecting the fans to kind of have as a favourite. I'm going to say that Bivol's going to win by unanimous decision. I feel like he's just not going to switch off into the later rounds like he did in that first fight. I feel like he could box very similarly and have a similar amount of success. It's just maybe he might slow down a little bit at times instead of just slowing down all at one time at the end, because he really let Beterbiev onto that fight, and maybe he thought that Beterbiev wouldn't be able to deal with going all the rounds, and Beterbiev kind of showed him wrong in that last contest. But now I feel like with Bivol's fight IQ and just general game plan knowledge and ability that he has, I feel like he will be able to deal with the power yet again of that Beterbiev and showcase that he can go all the rounds better and then keep that momentum going and win via unanimous decision this time. I still believe it's going to be a very great contest, a close fight, and an excellent, well fought fight, and definitely could have the makings for a trilogy, but I still believe, like I say, Bivol to win via unanimous decision. Then, of course, if he isn't going to have the trilogy versus Beterbiev, fights that could happen next, of course, Benavidez coming off an excellent victory versus David Morrell. That has been ordered, so perhaps that will happen. It seems like he wants that to happen, so maybe that will happen. Another name that could be added to Riyadh season with Benavidez. Buatsi versus Smith, of course, WBO interim title. Do I feel like that could happen? Probably not, to be completely honest. Or something like an Opataya, that could happen in the cruiserweight division, but again, like I say, I feel like that's unlikely. So I feel like it could be probably the trilogy or the fight versus Benavidez that will happen next. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Like I say, I'm sorry it's a long one, but it's a big card. I had to say everything in my opinion. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like video if you didn't need like video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.